Just how good is the Crane 4 from Zhiyun? Well, in today's video, we're gonna find out. If you're new around here, my name's Riley, and I'm a filmmaker who's produced documentaries on different continents around the world using the gear that I talk about on this channel. So if you're into making documentaries or films with small crews, then you're in the right place. Consider subscribing and following along. All right, back to the video. Now, Zhiyun did send me this Crane 4 for a review, and as far as I know, I get to keep it, so it's not like nothing of value changed hands, but as always, my opinions are my own, and they don't get to see the video before I post it. Now, just straight away, I do want to say that this is less of like an in-depth look at every single feature on the Crane 4, and it's more of just an overall impressions from using this gimbal for a few weeks. And I'm gonna be sharing kind of my perspective as someone who primarily is producing a lot of documentaries with small crews and is kind of doing basically like small crew documentary and branded content type work. Now, for me, I don't use gimbals a ton, and when I do use them, they're definitely nice to have, and I have taken gimbals with me overseas on some of the documentaries that I've shot, both in Africa and the Middle East, and they are really nice tools to be able to have when they work well. And I think for me, things that I need for a gimbal to work well in these types of settings is they have to be easy to set up, they have to be able to get balanced pretty quickly, and they have to have a decent enough payload, because I don't always have time to be sort of stripping my camera down to be able to plop on a gimbal and then take it off and build it back up in the way that I have it configured for shooting. So having a gimbal that has like a large enough cradle to be able to have my camera more or less built out is helpful, and having a big enough payload so that I don't have to swap out for like a really small lens or just strip the camera down, pull the cage off, and have to use it in like a minimalist setup. Because for me, gimbals are not my primary shots, and so the gimbal for me has to be able to work around the way that I like to work for it to be something that is gonna make it in my kit on most shoots. The thing that I was really curious about with just how good of a payload the Crane 4 is supposed to have is whether or not it could fit something like this. It's my Red Komodo, and it's pretty stripped down, but it still is very, very heavy. And this Sigma 18-35 lens is definitely long and chunky, and even with the smaller BP batteries, as opposed to like a V-mount setup, it is pretty heavy. So it would be impressive if the Crane 4 could support my Komodo and had that much headroom. So let's take a look and find out just how good the Crane 4 is and whether or not its payload can support my Komodo. So right off the bat, I'm gonna say that the Crane 4 is really impressive. The payload is absolutely great, and yes, it does support my Red Komodo, which I think is really impressive. Like, it is definitely a heavy gimbal, but it's got enough clearance to be able to use it in different configurations, and it's gonna support it no problem, which, I mean, this thing probably weighs 7 or 8 pounds, and I tried a configuration with a V-mount battery on the side, and I could get it balanced and supported like this, but there wasn't enough clearance to be able to use it in sort of, this like a lower angle type mode. And so if it's gonna be able to support this really chunky Red Komodo, then it's going to be able to support a Sony mirrorless camera, and even something like a C70 or an FX6 should fit on here no problem. So overall, the build quality is nice, and just the payload performance of it is great, and as well just the size of the cradle and just how much just extra room and space there is in here to be able to operate a Komodo and have something like this, and just it's not even breaking a sweat. So overall, super duper impressed with this. I said duper. The payload is good, but it's also pretty easy to set up and get going with it as well. The gimbal is smooth and works as advertised. And I think that we're probably in a similar situation with gimbals that we are to with modern cameras. Just about everything that's coming out above like a reasonable price point is gonna work really well. And I think whether you're looking at the Crane 4 or you're looking at a DJI product, I don't think that you're gonna go wrong necessarily. I think gimbals do what they're advertised, and different ones have little different bells and whistles that make them easier or more quirky to use. And in this case, I think the Crane 4's best standout feature is its payload, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't have some quirks as well. Some other things that really stood out as strengths to me with the Crane 4 are just how good just some of the little details are. So each of these axes that balance have different locking motors. And I know a lot of gimbals have this, but this just is really a nice feature that makes the gimbal easier to lock into place. So being able to just pick it up like this and not having it flop all over the place is something that's really helpful. And as well, the spot where the base plate slides into is the right shape to where I can use pretty much any standard Manfrotto plate. I can't verify every single Manfrotto plate out there, but I've been pretty frustrated with other gimbals in the past that kind of have like a Manfrotto plate, but it's sort of a proprietary Manfrotto plate. And for me, I've got one type of Manfrotto plate that I have on all my cameras. And so if it doesn't work on a gimbal and I have to swap out the base plate, then that creates like a pain point, like I mentioned before. And then as well, this is pretty easy to get set up in a vertical configuration. And I know that vertical video is not something that many of us are like thrilled about as filmmakers, but if it gets you some extra paying jobs and some extra clients, then it's definitely nice to have. And so if that's something that you rely on with your business, or you're a content creator that's creating vertical content and you don't want to shoot on an iPhone, you want to shoot on like a mirrorless camera or a nicer camera, then it's pretty easy to swap out, where you can just take this little plate off here, and then you can take this plate off like that. And then you can take the kind of receiver base plate here and lock it down like this. And then once you unlock all of the motors, then you can sort of put the gimbal in sort of like a vertical configuration where the camera's base plate could just snap onto the side of this guy. And now you've got your camera mounted vertically on the gimbal, and you don't need like a weird adapter L plate. These are just the proprietary plates, and I've just removed the horizontal arm here and just attached this receiver plate to the vertical plate. This gimbal does have most of the same features that just about every other gimbal has, both in terms of like the types of modes that it comes with: pan follow, lock mode, you know, the selfie modes, the vortex modes. It's gonna have pretty much all of the standard modes that you're gonna want on your gimbal, but it does have a few party tricks of its own, and one that I think is kind of the most unique that sets this gimbal apart from others is the fact that it has this little built-in light on it that you can dial in the intensity, and you can even dial in the white balance. So that's more daylight, and that's warmer tungsten. It's definitely not a feature that I would necessarily think to include on a gimbal, and I honestly can't say that I would use it super often. I would rather have like an assistant there with me holding a small light to be able to get the exact light in the exact right spot. But I think for a lot of content creators and people who are solo filmmakers, this is something that could be really nice in certain applications, to be able to have a small built-in little LED light that you can change because it's bicolor to match the environment. I think is something that is gonna just be helpful and be a useful thing that's there when you need it, and when you don't need it, you certainly don't have to use it. And obviously the thing that I think we all want to know that is most important with a gimbal is that the footage is really smooth. Gimbals these days are great, and I think that just the fact that this has such a high payload, if you're using something that is a little bit smaller and lighter, you are just gonna have a ton of headroom, and you're not gonna have to sort of fight against the gimbal to get smooth shots. So the Crane 4 is really good overall, but it does have a few quirks that are worth pointing out. And for me, the quirks have to do with the design of the gimbal and where some of the mounting points are located for the included accessories. So the gimbal has this like flat base design that is really nice. You could just set the gimbal down on a table and then get it balanced and built out. And this is like a pretty low profile, compact gimbal when it's just stripped down by itself like this. But there are these two 1/4-20 mounting points, and I think they're really the only spots that you can add different accessories to the gimbal. There's not like additional mounting points at the top, and there's not like NATO rails or anything up above. And so you have to use these 1/4-20 spots on the bottom. Now, the gimbal does come with two attachments that you can use, and they're these little handles. One of them looks like this, and it's just this like rubber grip thing that you can attach to the side of the gimbal and then hold. So when you're tipping it forward, you have another sort of kind of base to grip onto, and it's pretty small and compact and easy to toss in your bag, which is really nice. And the Crane 4 also comes with this little like tripod handle sort of thing. And again, this is really nice because it extends and like telephotos out and has this soft pad on here. And so again, a nice included accessory. But the thing that I don't like about it is the fact that when you attach one of these two accessories to the handle, it automatically requires that you need to use the included tripod foot, because the attachment is going to drop below where the base of the gimbal is. And so when you have the gimbal like this and you want to attach this little handle, as you can see, it is going to be below where the base would naturally be. And so if you're gonna use it at all and you're gonna set the gimbal down, you're gonna have to use the included tripod foot. Now, it's definitely nice that they send this to you, but when you add this tripod foot to the bottom, it does significantly like increase the overall profile of the gimbal itself. And now once you add this tripod foot on the bottom, then you can go ahead and attach either or both of these accessories to the side of the gimbal. But again, there's another friction pain point for me, and it's the fact that you can't attach either one of these handles to the gimbal without a tool. It's not a toolless design, and so it forces you to carry around this little Allen key. And now I think it's like a standard size tool, but it means if you were to lose it on a shoot day, you're not gonna be able to attach the handle. And if you wanna change the position of the handle, you would have to go find the tool in your bag, pull it out, loosen the screw that goes into that 1/4-20 to be able to either remove or adjust the position of the handle overall. So I think once you get the handle on the gimbal itself, it is pretty nice. Like, it's got this thumb screw that you can position it in different ways to be able to use at different angles. You can tilt it forward, and it is just nice to be able to have a second hand on your gimbal. And then as well, it's got this 1/4-20 mounting point on the top. And so it is nice to be able to add something like my smartphone to be able to monitor like my Red Komodo through the Red Control app on it. The other gripe I would have with the way that this is designed is that it does have a touchscreen, which is nice, but I, for the life of me, can't figure out how to use either of these control wheels or the different buttons on the camera to navigate through the menu and select different things. When I'm using the gimbal, I don't want to have to take my hand off the gimbal and fuss with this like little tiny 1-inch touchscreen to be able to change settings. I just want to be able to use the built-in dials that are right at my fingertips to be able to change some of the different modes or different settings. And From what I can tell, it might just be user error, but from what I can tell, you have to use the touchscreen to go through the menu. And because the touchscreen is like about an inch big, it is a little bit kind of fussy to be able to use. Overall, I think the Crane 4 is a really interesting gimbal. It's priced very competitively, and I think it rivals other gimbals like the RS3 Pro. The payload is impressive, and I think it could handle most configurations that you're gonna throw at it, given that the camera isn't too long. And I think if you're willing to work around some of the quirks with using the side handles like I mentioned, I think it's something that can be really interesting and really good for a lot of people. And I think especially for the fact that it's under $700 at the time of making this video and is gonna save you a few $100s compared to some of the other options out there, I think this gimbal is definitely worth considering. Now, I don't think that this gimbal is gonna be a perfect gimbal for the documentary run and gun style of shooter like I am, because of the fact that you need some extra tools to be able to work with some of the side handles that come with the gimbal. But I think if you're someone who has your camera on the gimbal a majority of the time because of the type of content that you shoot with, and you're someone who's probably gonna have the gimbal set up in the configuration that you like with the side handles and various attachments already built out and ready to go, I think that for that type of shooter, this gimbal is gonna be something that is really interesting. And because of the payload and the size of the cradle, I think it could last you through multiple different camera iterations. Because again, I think this gimbal is something that as your camera and lens kit grows, the gimbal is gonna be able to most likely keep up with those things. And for those reasons, I think the Crane 4 is a really interesting and competitive option. And if you're in the market for a one-handed gimbal that has a good payload, I think the Crane 4 is definitely worth considering. All right, I'll catch you guys in the next one.